Welcome back to another session of Better Podcasting Chats with me, SP. This is a streamed and recorded casual chat with hobby and passion podcasters to share their experience, knowledge, and joy of podcasting. Once this live stream is over, I'm going to take those recorded files and turn it into a podcast. Better Podcasting is a project by Stephen John Drew and myself to help hobby and passion podcasters start their podcasts and make their existing projects better, thus Better Podcasting. Since my last chat session, I have an important announcement regarding Better Podcasting. Stephen and I had a long call about the future of Better Podcasting, and we're looking at a return of the main show before the end of 2022. So stay tuned for future announcements with more specifics. I don't have any more specifics right now, but there will be announcements coming in the next few weeks. Now, this past week in space has been really busy, so I apologize, but I am going to go through it because they're major stuff. My return to the moon watch continues at NASA's Artemis is hoping for a September 23rd launch attempt following repairs of the tail service mast umbilical's quick disconnect hydrogen fuel line. You try saying that 5 times fast. This date is dependent on the U.S. Space Force's waiver of the SLS Flight Termination System certification. So, my watch will continue for another few weeks on NASA's continued return to the moon. Meanwhile, SpaceX's Starship development continues. The Starship main booster number 7 underwent a successful 30 rocket engine prime spin test, and the Starship S-24 underwent a successful full 6-engine static fire test for about 6 seconds. And then it resulted in a literal dumpster fire. Yes, a literal dumpster fire. Dumpster fire on the test stand area caught fire. And unfortunately, the wild grass around the test pad caught on fire, which burned out a significant portion of the surrounding area. Everyone is anxiously awaiting what is happening with Starship, since both NASA's Artemis and SpaceX's Starship will be needed to return people to the moon under the Artemis program. And this is late breaking news as we start this stream today on Monday, September 12th, 2022. I saw something astounding. Blue Origin's New Shepard N-23 launch was aborted about a minute after takeoff in West Texas due to the main booster failure. No one was on board, and the capsule was full of scientific experiments, some of which were made by grade schoolers. The capsule aborted successfully and landed safely on the ground. There is currently no word on what caused the New Shepard failure in the booster. The FAA will investigate the event, and Blue Origin's New Shepard is grounded until cleared by the FAA. While this was the same system that brought a few people into orbit, like William Shatner, very briefly, about 5 minutes, the human-rated booster is New Shepard's booster number 4, while the booster that experienced the anomaly today was booster number 3. Now, booster number 1 crashed in development in 2015, and booster number 2 was retired after 5 successful flights in 2016. This was booster number 3's 9th flight. Now, transitioning to my other podcasting stuff over on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., we continue to have a blast reviewing the Disney Plus series She-Hulk Attorney at Law. If you haven't checked that out, please do so. I think you'll enjoy it. It's been worth the watch so far, and we're excited to discuss all the major D26 announcements over the weekend on our next episode, so catch that over on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. In case you are new to Better Podcasting Chats with SP, if you are a hobby or passion podcaster, I am interested in chatting with you. And if you want to schedule a time to chat with me about your podcasting experience and your podcast, please send me an email to stargatepioneer@betterpodcasting.com or send me a DM on Twitter or Discord, and we'll arrange a date. In case you don't think this applies to you, it probably does. And I'm excited to chat with you. Now, for the next hour, I'm chatting with a Hall of Fame award-winning podcaster who proclaims to have been podcasting since 1999. He's organized and held his own community meetup convention called Nerdtacular. He's a true artist and creator, producing the webcomic Extra Life starting in 2001 and the webcomic Fred and Can starting in 2019. He's a host of many shows such as The Morning Stream, Film Sack, Play Retro, and There Will Be Dungeons, to name a few, all on the podcast network Frogpants, which he founded. He guests on the weekly daily tech news show with Tom Merritt, Sarah Lane, and producer Anthony Amos Lemos, who previously chatted with me a few weeks ago. He has created his own card games, and I'm sure there's a few dozen accomplishments that I haven't even covered yet that hobby and passion podcasters and enthusiasts would all enjoy learning from. Welcome to the chat, Mr. Scott Johnson.
Well, hello, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here talking some of the primordial ooze of making podcasts and creating content.
And primordial ooze is probably correct for you, since your Twitter profile says you started podcasting in 1999, which is 5 years before Adam Curry and Dave Weiner invented RSS.
Yeah, that's true. It was called just Scott putting MP3s up on a website at the time, but I have always had a bug for radio since I was a very little kid. And the minute it was possible to create MP3s, which was really the big innovation at that point, 99, 98, 99, I went, well, of course I'm going to make some of those. And I did them around sort of a hobbyist view of a video game that I was following at the time, a full modification of Unreal Tournament called Infiltration. And I loved that thing. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to make a little show. I'm going to call it Infiltration Radio. And I'm going to start putting these up on a site, and then people can come on there and check it out and play it in Winamp or whatever player they're going to use back in those days. And little did I know that digital audio would become not only a much bigger thing, but there would be better tools and better technology to deliver it to people within just a few years from then. But I was just happy to have the medium. I was excited to make it. I was doing some weekends on a local AM station for a tech tech support sort of radio show that we did on the weekends. And I was itching to do my own stuff, and this was my chance. So I went for it because the internet provided.
I see. So that microphone was calling from you for a very early age.
Yeah. And I was also, in those early days, I don't think I had access to much in the way of good bandwidth. I think those original episodes were probably like 56K MP3s posted to the website via a dial-up connection, because I'm pretty sure I was still stuck in some dial-up at that time. That started changing quickly with DSL and other stuff. But in a lot of ways, I'd glommed onto the internet as a place to put content very early. And so that's what I started doing. I just saw it as a place to start doing that. And it was less of the place it is now. It's easy for anyone to put stuff up on there now. But back then you had to kind of work for it. You had to build your own websites and host somewhere and buy your own domains. And domains were like $75 a year. And, it was just a different animal than it is in 2022. But I regret none of it. It was great to start out early in that space and keep growing it into what it's become today.
So once the RSS was invented and you glommed onto it, I think, was your first podcast Extra Life Radio? Was that your true first podcast?
First podcast to technically use RSS and be distributed in that way was Extra Life Radio, which was a show. I purely called it that because I was busy doing my webcomic at the time. Another web-based outlet for a traditional medium like comics. And I've been drawing and recording, audio tapes since I was a little kid. So these are just all things that have followed me my whole life. And the second those standards became, I became aware of them, I jumped all over it and said, well, I'm doing this. Of course I'm doing this. And I immediately got into it. Extra Life Radio was a show that lasted until, went from early days 03 before the standard, then revived it in 04 with the standard, and that ran until 2009. So pretty good run. At the time, it felt like an eternal run. It felt like the longest run ever. But since then, I've done shows for 16 years for one of them. Another one just hit 12, I think. Another one hit 13. So I've got like this crazy longevity to a few of my shows, which at the time I thought maybe they'd last a couple of years, and they've gone much further than I expected. But yeah, ELR was the big beginning, and it was a great place to sort of experiment and see what the medium was capable of and start to build an audience and a community. And, that's what we did. It kind of happened organically. I wasn't really trying to do that. My goal was in fact, it wasn't really to do anything other than just, I had passion for making it. And I thought, well, if I can get an audience that will enjoy it, and I don't care how big or small it is, that'll be enough motivation to do it. I was working full time as a graphic designer and had been, for my entire adult life at that point. And I had little idea that one day I could turn that into a business and jump out and do it full time. But I did. I indeed ended up doing that in 2009. The same year ELR ended was the year I kicked out on my own.
So Extra Life Radio was what was preventing you from going full time into podcasting.
I mean, no, but it sometimes feels weird that stopped the same time I started the full time. But I also turned around and crammed a bunch of new stuff in almost immediately. You and I were talking a little bit pre-show about this, but I have a really hard time not filling every space I have with new content. And so what I should have done in 2009 is said, all right, let's plan better so that I've got good work-life balance. Instead, I went, nope, every second available to me is now time for me to make more things. And I became the world's worst boss. And I'm the only employee, and I treated myself like crap and worked way, way, way too hard during those early years. And it's one of the things I would actually give people advice about is if you do have the wherewithal and the means to jump out and do it full time, and that took time to get there. But once you have the means to do that, pay as much attention to quality of the time you're going to create as you do the things you create. Because there is such a thing as just overdoing it or overfilling your schedule. And I have since then sort of learned my dirty lesson and pulled back a little bit. And it hasn't hurt me at all. If anything, it's helped. So if I had any early advice in this discussion, it would be find a good balance in the beginning, best you can. You're not going to do it perfectly. No one does. But try to do that so you're not, burning yourself out after 3 years or 4 years.
On episode 50 of the main Better Podcasting show, we decided to do something that was big. And we decided to do the 15 golden rules of hobby podcasting. One of those rules was my rule that said, if you're a hobby podcaster, don't do more than 2 shows a week because you're just not going to have time for yourself to consume a video game or a TV show or whatever, and then talk about it and then promote it and then connect with your audience. You do more than 2 and you don't have time to eat and go to work and pay the bills that lets you podcast and that sort of stuff. Since then, I have kind of drawn back. I will still maintain that, but I will say that really, if you're in 2022, if you're going to do all the things to grow your show and engage your community, as a hobby podcaster with a full-time job, family life, and trying to just continue a holistic person, maybe 1, but definitely no more than 2. So that's been a mainstay of Better Podcasting for 7 years now, is only do 2 shows and then treat yourself to some off time. We all talk about taking time off from your podcast, having vacations. We talked about seasons. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that, you mentioned something before I wanted to double back on. You had been doing podcasts for so long. And what is the right length of a podcast? You look at, is it time to end the podcast? And probably scheduling too. So let's just start with the longevity of the shows. What is too long for a show?
That's a really, really great question. I've done a million of these kind of conversations and no one's ever asked that question. And even I think I'm sort of bad at answering it because there's something different about a project you create yourself that has got all your blood, guts, sweat, and tears in it, not somebody else's. It's not some TV show you enjoy that ends after 10 seasons. There's nothing you can do, A, to control that, and B, if it ends and you think it's too early to end, well, what are you going to do? Just say, oh, well, I sure enjoyed that show. Sadly, it's ending. No more Seinfeld, no more, whatever the show is. But when it's your own thing and you've created this thing and worked hard on it and built it over time, there is this feeling of like, well, if it's going well, I don't want to end it. Like, I just want to keep it going for as long as it can go. And I used to think that was like this badge of honor. And in some ways it is, but in other ways, you can see on the horizon when things are going to run a course or when maybe is the right time to pull the train over. And ignoring those, I think, is can be done at people's peril. I think you shouldn't ignore them. It doesn't mean you have to end, but it's good to every once in a while ask the question. And I'll give you an example. In 2006, January of that year, I launched a podcast called The Instance, which became, up until recently, the biggest thing I'd ever made. It was a World of Warcraft focused podcast, which at the time there were only like 3 or 4, which is why I started it. Now there are hundreds, or there were last I checked. And we started the show kind of perfect time for both the game and the attention of the players. And also podcasting was still in its infancy, and it was just a great time to launch it. And I didn't really even know it at the time, but it turned out to be all the planets aligned for that particular show. And we immediately took off. We got featured on iTunes, which was also just now, that was their first foray into podcasting that same year, where they had, listings and all of that. And it took off like crazy and blew past everything else I'd done up to that point by magnitudes. And I remember the time just going, man, this is the greatest thing. I'm never going to stop doing the show. I'm just going to keep making this. And for a really long time, it was my core passion to make it. It was the number one thing that I focused on. I had other projects, other shows, other things, but they, paled in comparison to the overall like passion and momentum that The Instance had. And I just ended that show this year. 16 years of that show, and I finally ended it. Now, here's the truth. If I'm honest about it, I probably could have ended it 2018, maybe 2017 even. Because at that point, we were sort of past the height of it all. We were definitely in the downturn. And by the downturn, I just mean, the game is nearly 20 years old. Everybody and their dog has played it. It's not the cultural touchstone it was at one point. And even my own interest in it, I played it to death. Like I've done everything you can do in the game. And so for me to create commentary and content around it became more and more of a job and less of a passion project for me. And I realized that I was actually just kind of holding myself back and expending a lot of energy trying to make that work where I could spend it elsewhere and make better products elsewhere. So I finally made the very difficult decision to end it. If I were to do it differently, I'm a big fan of the seasons. Okay. I like seasons because seasons have an automatic implication in them, which is, let's say you design them as 10 episode seasons for your podcast. You know that after season 1, if you commit to 2, great. You're doing 2 and 10 more are coming. You get the end of 2 and you go, you know what? We're going to go with 3. Great. You got 10 more of those. Now you've got 30 episodes of a show. It's going great. It may go for another 10 years or however many seasons you can fit in those 10 years. Or you may decide at the end of season 4, you know what? We've run our course. And that makes sense to everybody, to you, to the people who listen, to everybody who's come in contact with your show, large or small. They understand the structure of seasons. They've seen it their entire lives on television and in different ways. Trilogies of films is a good example, even though it's only 3. But this structure lends itself well to start and stopping points and knowing how to contain these things that get a little bit out of control. If you don't think in that regard, then you're never sure quite when to do it. It never feels right because you don't have an ending point. You're just at 1,000 episodes and you don't know where to go from there. I say this with at least 2, possibly more, of my mainline shows right now that are just in perpetuity. My morning show is at episode 2000, I can tell you, 2,346 as of tomorrow. That show's been on the air since 2011. I have no desire to end it. But also morning shows are different. They kind of go on in perpetuity. Whereas a show that's focused on, let's say, a video game like the Instance had an expiration date, whether I liked it or not. And so it's not going to be a hard rule for every single thing you do. And by all means, if you're still having a blast, keep making it as long as you want to make it. It's just, there's something about the structure of seasonal content that at least gives you some markers and says, here's where we started. Here's where it only temporarily ends until we make a decision. Okay, now we've made a decision. Now it temporarily ends over here, and so on and so forth until you decided you've done enough. And I think that goes down easier for you as the creator ending your show, and it goes down easier for the listeners who count on it being there.
So on the Apple TV Plus show, The Morning Stream, who's going to play Scott Johnson?
Well, they stole our acronym, those jerks. we love to give them crap about that. But yeah, it's funny. The morning show is a weird egg because somebody out there's going to hear this and kind of, I think they're going to feel a similar way about whatever they're passionate about. But ever since I was a kid, I wanted to make morning radio, but I wanted to make good morning radio because I think morning radio generally is bad. I think it's just bad. No offense to morning radio people, but traditional terrestrial radio with its traffic and weather on the nines and its overuse of commercials and its constant honk, honk, wink, wink sort of humor and laughing at nothing just really grinds on me. I can't stand it. It feels disingenuous. It just feels like it's phony baloney from day one. But I know that there can be magic in a morning show. There have been moments in my life where I've heard one and gone, now that's the energy I'm looking for. So for me in 2011, it was just, I'm going to finally pull the string on this and go and do my own. And who cares where it goes? Just see what happens. I'm going to do it 4 days a week, plus some extra stuff on the weekends. And we're just going to see. And it's some of the most fun, rewarding, community building, wonderful thing that we've ever had. So sometimes just your wild, dumb idea about I could do this better, or I don't like what I'm hearing on the radio, so I'm going to do a version of it. Some of those have been my most successful. The same thing happened with Warcraft. I didn't like what was being done. I couldn't listen to those other shows. They either really poor quality or lousy mics or didn't know when to hit stop and start and end up with 5-hour shows for no good reason. And I just thought, well, I know I can do better than this, so I'm just going to do it. And those always end up being my biggest things. It's the ones where I think it's like, oh no, we should plan this out and really think about the demographics today and who's our intended audience. Like that kind of thinking slows me down, does not do much good for me. And I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but for me, those passion gut instincts have paid off for me.
And there's something to be said about having some sort of a plan going into things. I mean, the 3 guys, 1 microphone sitting around their dorm room thing. Okay, that might work depending on what your content is, sort of thing. So there is that aspect of things, but I agree. Be creative. Creativity is what's really going to drive this industry as it goes forward, even from the hobbyist standpoint of getting noticed. Like, how is your show different? What's the topic you're talking about? How are you approaching it differently than everybody else? Because you can't depend on fame. To circle back to another thing you mentioned, don't overschedule yourself. What are some keys to scheduling yourself that you use that could be applied to passion or hobby podcasters?
Oh man. In the early days, it's changed, it's evolved. But finding what you really want to do, because you're right, 3 guys in a microphone is like the most like standard freaking bog standard idea. Right? Like, hey, we're all friends. We get along. We should talk on a microphone. I say that knowing that like my show Film Sack, which is me and 3 other guys sitting around a microphone talking about movies, is kind of that. But we have the advantage of starting kind of early in the scene. We started in 2009. And that shows like for single episode downloads is the biggest thing I have right now. That and the core gaming show are about neck and neck. But anyway, the point is, if you've got the right personalities, great. That's a start. That's where you get going. But what you really want to do is have a point. And the point for us was streaming services are a thing. And back in 2009, they were only a thing for about a year and a half. And it was mostly Netflix. That's all there was, really. What we noticed in those early days is that Netflix was putting a bunch of old, crummy 80s movies on there. Sometimes 90s, but just junk stuff you don't care about, things like horror movies and bad action films and this sort of thing. And I thought, well, that's fun. Why don't we talk about those? We like bad movies. Let's watch them and then get together and talk about them, play clips from the movie, have all this commentary. And that was a relatively simple approach, but it was like this new idea in this burgeoning new space of content streaming, of cutting out cable and going to streaming services. And that's done nothing but grow, which means the show has had nothing but an endless supply of content. Like we're nowhere near touching on everything, even though we're at, I don't know, almost 600 episodes, but there's a lot more than 600 movies And every week is a delight and a good time. And so it's the perfect match of, hey, we've got the guys around the microphone part. Do we have the meaningful discussion part? And that came from all of our loves of film, and that finished the puzzle. I think that's honestly all it takes. I think if anyone out there's like, you know what, me and my two college buddies, we are so funny together, we should totally do a podcast. I agree. But decide now what you're going to talk about. It can't just be, we're just going to sit around and laugh and tell stories, unless you're really good at that. Like if you're really good at that, then that's great. Do that. That's 90% of what comedians turned podcasters do. But they're also stage trained comedians who can do that with the drop of the hat, and that's kind of their whole world. And they bring a lot of audience with them. For the rest of us, we got to kind of start at zero. And to do that, we need to not only have the personalities that mesh, the laughs that come, the intelligent back and forth that needs to be there, but what else is there? And I think you can pretty easily just glom onto the stuff you love, and you'll find it. And for us, it's always been niche sort of nerd content, whether it's film or comic books or television or it's just the state of the nerd world right now, where we're just having an overabundance of content that is aimed at us. That provided a huge place for us to talk around. And just 10 years prior to that, I don't think it would have worked, because it just wasn't the same world. So I think that's key. It's just kind of hard to explain how we did. I just got excited one day about old crappy movies on streaming services and how it was just suddenly available to us in this very easy to get to way. Just fire up your browser and bam, you're watching, I don't know, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And that felt like enough of a unique part of modern life that we could say, we're going to do a show around that thing. And it's not that different than doing a show around World of Warcraft or a show around whatever it may be, daily news or comment or politics or whatever happens to be your jam. Grab that thing and then apply your three guys in a microphone to it, not the other way around, if that makes sense.
It does. And as far as the scheduling goes, are there, you limit yourself to like one show with your fellow guys to do that, and hopefully you connect with your audience and you're able to promote and grow your community from that? Just try to limit the amount of creative projects you have going on at the same time.
I mean, yeah, the hard part for me is, how do I put this? Like, a lot of show content producers spend a lot of time with making sure all the gaps in sentences and all the uhs and ums are gone. Like, they really are aiming for like this perfection in final edit sort of approach, which I have no problem with. And I like constructed content like that when I'm consuming it. For me, though, one of the keys to this all working at all and happening every day at the rate it's happening for me is getting really good at filling the air on the fly, but not with not with just fluff, with actual content, with meaningful content. And it's a skill. You got to get good at it. You have to get good at being able to say things on the fly, react to other people on the fly, and not just laugh at them and say the same three things you always say. That'll never get you anywhere. But being able to just really mush all our brains together and have them fire constantly for the hour and a half, 2 hours that you're recording, that all you have to do when you're done is maybe slap an outro and intro on that show and put it up. And in my case, I play all that stuff live anyway, so it's all there. And I do very, very little editing. If you can do that, I think it's it's awesome. If you can afford some producer to do all that for you, even better. Do that. But, just know going into it that if you're going to be really fastidious about every sentence, every word, every single thing, even mistakes, like I'll make huge mistakes on a show and my brain goes into a binary choice mode. It says, all right, you can mark this and go back and fix it later, which sometimes I'll do. Or I can let it fly. I can lean into it and I can self-deprecate my way around it. And often I'll do that because in my case, can't say this is true for everybody, but in my case, I think that endears the listener host relationship more than me editing. Basically, I am who you get. And I realize that in some cases, maybe that's not a great idea. And it's good to edit out a bunch of stuff. But in my case, I think my actual personality and attitude translates extremely well to live audio. And so I just let it go. And I think you kind of have to do that to make that work. If I didn't do that, I don't know how I would have raised these 3 kids, done this on the side, had a full-time job. I don't know how it would have worked if I'd have gotten too bogged down and, worrying about every single word and every single sentence and every single bit of timing. That just would have slowed me down to the point that I'm not sure I would have gone for it.
How much do you think preparation helps you in those live stream events as you're going through your podcasting creative process?
Well, for me, it's a big part of it, but it's not a Bible sort of approach. It's basically, for example, every day for the morning show, I have an outline. And in that outline, we've got links to the news we're going to cover, or stuff we're going to talk about at the top of the show, or maybe a quiz we're going to do in the middle of the show for a prize, or whatever 100 things we were doing for your average Tuesday. And every day I fill that all in, usually the night before. I kind of have a checklist of everything I want to make sure to hit. And structurally, we have the structure of the show, and we have roughly how much time we want to fill. It's an hour and a half typically. We go a little over, go a little under. It's fine. We're not that hardcore on that. But once the outline is sort of there, none of it's like read, like your intro you did today, all your sort of conversational style. You approach the news about what's going on with space stuff and all that. That's basically what I'm doing. Like I've got in my head what I've read, what I've studied about, what I looked up the day before, what I brushed up on because we knew we were going to talk about it or whatever. And then that and some really simple outline type notes is all I need. The rest of it is just off the cuff. And usually we never stick to any old script anyway. If something looks like we're going to go in a certain direction and I think it's a valuable direction, we'll just go there. So preparation's important, but only from like a being prepared to being prepared to go off track, which sounds weird, but I think that's an important part of the prep. No matter what you write, assume that you may skip right over it, or you may go deeper than you thought you would, or you may get distracted by some side PS comment in the email you're reading and spend more time answering the PS than you did the actual email question. Like, those things are all going to happen, and it's 100% okay that you do. You got to trust your instincts to go the direction that you think the content is dragging you. So to more simply answer your question, I think preparation is always important no matter what you're doing in life, but I don't like the idea of it shackling me to some script. I hate that. So I never work that way.
Since you are obviously a Hall of Fame award-winning podcaster, which is awesome, by the way, how have you improved from start to get where you are today? What is 1 or 2 things that that you've improved on over the years to get you to the skill set you're at today?
That's such a good question. 1 or 2. Probably. Well, part of it is just doing it has trained me to be a better time filler and communicator. Just the act of doing it every day and doing diverse numbers of shows and having them all be different focuses has trained me to pretty much, you could put me on a stage right now and say, grab that microphone and give me a half hour. I could do it.
I'd pay $10 to see that.
Oh, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Like, what's weird is, here's how I know that was getting better for me. In the early days, we'll call them 2010 to 2013, let's say, when I was doing things that involved a stage, or I'd get invited to a con and have to speak, or at my own events, I'd get up in front of 1,000 people and do my thing. I was terrified. Like, that's a different venue than me behind a microphone at home. Even if I got a big chat room, it's still just me, and I can deal with that. I don't have to look at all their faces. So that kind of stuff freaked me out in those early days. But the more I did it, and the more I just got used to, filling air with content, it got easier and easier, to the point that, for example, in 2018, I was asked to do a Q&A panel at BlizzCon for the World of Warcraft development team that year. And that was 30,000 people in that audience. And I thought I was supposed to be terrified, but it never happened. I never got scared and I never got nervous. And that was weird. It was almost like I was watching it from afar, seeing myself not be freaked out by this and having a natural confidence, not one I had to psych myself up for. I just knew I had the chops to do it, even off script. If I had nothing, if all I did was just thrown up there and said, all right, well, let's get this going, I could have done it. And I did. I got up there in 2018, 30,000 people, had a great time. Crowd yelled and cheered. It was a big, fun time. They told me it was one of the best we'd done. Maybe they tell everybody that, but 30,000 people later, I walked off there and was just fine. Like it was nothing. And I'm not saying that this is going to be true for everybody and everybody's going to have different levels of anxiety about this sort of stuff. But for me, that was a big revelation of like, oh, well, if you do something, the 10,000 hour rule, for example, you do something so many times and for so long that it just kind of becomes like breathing. That's how I feel right now. Like I don't have any concern about any of that. Like used to be, I'd be guesting on people's shows like this one and I'd be a little bit nervous about it. I don't feel that way anymore because I just know whoever it is, I'm going to get along with them just great. And I'm going to talk about stuff I like. So what's the big deal there? And there's no reason to be freaked out by it. And so, yeah, I think to answer your question, I do this a lot. I tell a giant story around your question and then I finally answer it. Here's your answer. I think the ability to do that stuff on my feet, on the fly, at a moment's notice, that's a skill that is absolutely improved. It's not even one I aim to improve. It just happens when you do this long enough and do it enough. And that makes a big deal for me because no matter what happens, no matter what goes down, we could have a guest die on the air while we're interviewing him, for example. I hope that never happens. But let's say we had a guest on the morning stream just kill over in the middle of an interview. I think I could deal with it. I think I'd know what to do and how to deal with it and what to do next and how to move us on and, all of those things. That's an extreme example, but I feel that way. And I didn't always feel that way. So I think that's a good measurement of something that improved for me. You said one or two. Maybe that's the only one. I don't know. That's another fine. One. The other one's more like, I don't know. I guess I don't know what I am. I don't know what another one is, but I feel like that was always the chief goal or the chief skill to improve without even knowing it. Because once you're good at that, you can talk to anybody about anything. Even people you really have hardcore disagreements with, I can have a really good conversation with, record it and have that go up and have people go, oh, that was a great interview. That's not always been true for me. So yeah, I think that's my answer.
I would agree with that. It's actually come up in several of these chats, specifically the 10,000 hour rule. I think that was in Outliers. I'm not sure where the origination is of that, just off the top of my head.
But it's either Outliers or Tipping Point. I read both those, and I can't remember which one it was in, but one of his two books.
That is one of the reasons that I wanted a podcast, because in my line of work, I have to get up and present to a bunch of people, and I just wanted to get better at presenting. I wanted to get better behind the microphone. I wanted to get better improvising, ad-libbing, that sort of thing. And I wanted to talk to people about what I like, the topics that I like. I wanted to develop a community around certain things because it just didn't exist. Voices of Defiance was one of my first podcasts about the television show Defiance. Nobody else was really doing it. So I was grateful to have that little community. And we got to talk to a lot of the actors and the showrunner at the very end too, got his thoughts on what the next season was going to be when they got canceled. So that was all great. I've also presented at panels at C2E2 in Chicago, at Gen Con in Indianapolis. Hasn't been 30,000 people though. So I have to ask you, could you see the 30,000 people or were the lights in your face so you just saw the 10 people in front?
That's a really good question too. I had here's the problem. I had to walk through that crowd to get to the stage, then go backstage and then come out again. And so I saw them going in and I honestly thought that would have been the freak out time, partly because there was a bunch of people I knew personally that were there to support me. They were in the front row and they made me more nervous than any of them. Like everybody else is just one big stranger as far as I'm concerned. But the first two rows were like, oh my gosh, these are friends and my family, my kids, my wife are all there. So that was, if anything, they were the most nerve-wracking. But when I was actually on stage, the lights were bright enough that you could probably see, you could see back far enough where there was at least 10,000 people in my view. But everybody beyond that's kind of muted. What would happen that would kind of weird me out or kind of give you a little bit of jolt is you're in the middle of talking, and if I said something that was funny, or the panelist said something funny or whatever, the erupting laughter and or applause or whatever was coming out of the crowd was so overwhelmingly loud that it was those moments you're like, oh, right. This place is, this is the entire Anaheim Convention Center all the way to the back wall, filled with people who are watching this right now. And that acted as like this strange, almost like ocean waves of like, oh, right, we're in the water right now. Like, I don't know, it's hard to explain.
That's a good analogy, in the water with waves. Yeah.
A little bit, yeah. And it was, the thing is, I would rather be on stage in front of 30,000 people than I would in front of 10 people of any ilk. That sounds like a nightmare. Like 10 people sounds like the worst idea ever. Oh my gosh. That literally freaks me out. And I think the difference is, what's the old statement? They usually do it around war or something, but like, one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. I think there's some of that going on, where the more people there are, the less I worry about it. And the less number of people, the more I do, because now it's like down to individuals, and you're thinking about them individually and what their personalities are like and what they're hearing. And it's a weird dichotomy that I don't think I expected before experiencing it myself.
I could do both. I do a lot of how to podcast panels or how to start your podcast panels. And sometimes at conventions, you only get like 10 or 20 people at those. But I also like the rooms where there's hundreds or even thousands. I've been on stage with some important people, so I just personally, I get used to it, or I've gotten used to it. And I don't have the, what's it called? When you get starstruck, I guess, I don't really put famous people on pedestals, because they're just people. They might be very successful people doing what they do better than anybody else out there, but they're just people when it comes down to it. So that's something
you and I agree on that. It's actually been a real benefit to feel that way from the get-go, because I end up interviewing some of my heroes, but I don't treat them weird on the show. Like, I had Todd McFarlane, one of my favorite artists, creators, founder of Image, co-founder of Image Comics, like one of the most important, interesting, controversial dudes of his era. And I got to have him on the show, and I loved every second of that interview, but it was far less restrained, because we didn't treat it like, well, you're the celebrity and I'm just the guy talking to you. We just laid it all out there. I asked hard questions that he probably wasn't expecting. And I think that's another skill that either comes to you right away or you have to work on. And I think that one, for some reason, just is not a huge deal for me. And it sounds like not for you either. And I think that's good, because otherwise those interviews always end up sounding like the person's just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're here. I can't believe you're sitting here talking to me. And you just get that vibe the whole time. And to me, it ruins those interviews. I like the ones where it's like, welcome to the show. So tell us how you feel about your new movie. Okay, cool. And then you get deeper and deeper and deeper. And, by the time you're done, you feel like friends were talking, not some weird class system of celebrity and scrub.
One way I know to get around that is, in case somebody does get starstruck, because we all have the one or two people out there that we're like, I can't believe I'm talking to you. That if you're interviewing or you're having this conversation with multiple people, then you can rely on the other 1, 2, or 3 people to step in while you just sit there going, I can't believe you're actually on the call with me right now. So that's one way. If for hobby or passion podcasters, that's a tip that I would give out there. Talking about hobby and passion podcasters, there are a lot of gearheads that are dealing with gear acquisition syndrome that listen to Better Podcasting, that's in our audience. And they would not forgive me if I didn't ask you what gear you are using to record and stream on right now. So if you just go over that really quick.
Yeah, super simple stuff. I like to keep things simple. I'm using a Hi-L PR40, which feels like gospel standard for all podcasters, for my microphone. I do love it. I have 2 of those here in the studio. So when I'm recording with someone live here, or do a show with my wife, her and I use these. Love them. They're great. Can't say enough about them. And I've had this forever. It'll never die. It's an amazing microphone. So there's that. I have relatively simple. It's 16 channel, but I don't need that much. I just got a good deal on it. This mixer from Mackie that is by design. I got an analog one. I don't care about USB effects and all that crap. Like, it bores me to tears to deal with that stuff. Plus USB audio is always a little weird. So I got an analog mixer. I run everything on, all my production work is on a Mac. I use one of the new M1s, and I cannot say enough about how awesome the new M1 Macs are. For once, it feels like for once in a long time, a company really touted a new thing and delivered it. The M1 is an incredibly adept piece of hardware to perform when it comes to lots of stuff, video editing and other things. But really, with podcasting, I'm forever hooked unless they screw these up. So I've been using that. What else? Gosh, that's about it. I use an S7 Sony for my camera that I'm on right now. I got a Elgato lighting system in here. Nothing fancy.
Do you record in Logic?
Pretty standard. Nope. I use Audition, Adobe Audition, and I use a little piece of Mac software called Loopback, as well as its sort of sister software for soundboard stuff called Farrago. I'm not sure how you say it. Never quite knew how to pronounce it. Anyway, these are two pretty simple little apps that let me do a lot of virtual routing of stuff, so I can tell it what I want it to hear and what I want it not to hear. And it's just elegant and easy on here. Just super, super simple. I have a PC, but I use it mainly for gaming, and PC audio has always been a bit of a headache for me. So I'm definitely on the Mac side of things when it comes to that, because there's just a real simplicity to the way that stuff works, and I never have to tweak it. I like when that stuff gets out of my way and I can just make a show, but still offer really, I want the quality is number one. Like, I don't want to make a show that sounds like crap. I refuse. But if I hit a certain baseline of quality, I'm happy, and I'll stick with this for as long as this makes sense. Who knows, down the road they may go, oh, the hot new thing, you got to get into this, and then I'll probably fiddle with it. I pay attention to all those trends, but I am a big believer in don't be cheap, but be simple, because the more complex you make your stuff, the less time you're spending creating and more time tweaking and fiddling. And unless that's your thing, if you like to tweak and fiddle, no poo-poo toward anyone who loves that. It's just not my jam. I want to make a show, and I don't want to think about all the technical problems while I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's kind of what Steven and I do. We tinker with stuff, also because we're trying to tinker with stuff for our audience and show them different ways to do things. I just upgraded, by the way, myself a few months ago from the Mackie Pro FX 16 V2, so 16 channel Mackie mixer, and I upgraded to the Rodecaster Pro 2. And you're talking about simplification. I got rid of probably about $2,000 worth of gear and then shoved it all into that Rodecaster Pro 2.
People love that thing. I've heard nothing but good things about Rodecaster. That's one I'm actually interested in checking out, but I haven't.
Well, the 2 is just amazing. I know Tom Merritt over on Daily Tech News Show just got the 1, but the 2 is so, for streamers, it's so much better. It's got so many other just tidbits to it. I highly recommend it for podcasters and streamers. It's expensive, but like I said, I replaced $2,000 worth of gear with it, so I'm happy with it.
Yeah, like you'll have some savings on the other end, because there's a lot of other little bobs and whistles you probably don't have to worry about once you've got that thing. They seem pretty rad. I've not fiddled with one, but everyone I've talked to, including Tom, just raves about theirs. They love it.
So you created a podcast network, Frogpants. What was the origin of the name?
Oh, okay. So I do get this question sometimes. So back in 96, 7, something like that, I'm still pretty newlywed. Kim and I are, just starting our lives together or whatever. And I had this wild idea about opening a kids bookstore. And she thought, well, that'd be cool one day. How do we do that? And we just thought about it a little bit. And we're like, what's a cool name for a kids bookstore? And I'm starting digging around, and I'm registering domains left and right for other dumb things I'm working on, and little projects here and there, my web comic that was coming up and all that. And I settled on this, or I like the name. I like frogs, just from the standpoint of, hey, kids love frogs. Frogs are cool. What if it was a frog wearing pants and he was the logo, and it's, Frogpants bookstore, and it's just super like kid friendly, funny, weird, kind of art and stuff. And she goes, yeah, it's really good. So we registered it and just held on to it and thought, well, one day if we ever do this, we'll have it. Well, jump up to 2008 or so, 9. And my accountant knows that I'm about to do this full time. I got to get a business license. I got to jump through all those tax hoops. I got to figure out what kind of business it is and my limited liability company, all the boring crap. And he says, you also need a name and we need to, trademark it for the Utah submission and all this stuff. And I scoured everything I already owned thinking, well, maybe I've got something here. And I hit Frogpants and went, oh, I still really love that name. Why don't we use this name? It's like 10 years later, but let's just use it. It won't hurt. And even if we do the bookstore later, no problem. We'll just call it the Frogpants Bookstore and it's just part of the company. And hell, we could do like the Frogpants Cafe, we could do anything with it. And so I used it and it stuck and it worked out great. And the main goal there was twofold. One, I wanted something a little quirky and fun that I could do art around and junk like that, but also something that was unique and nobody else was using. And turns out nobody's using Frogpants because it's a weird thing. And so I stuck with Frogpants. The same reason I try to name shows that way now too. If there's like a new show, I try to go as far away from everybody else's stupid naming conventions as possible, because if you know anything about 2022, it's impossible to be new anymore. Everybody's doing stuff and everybody's vying for your attention and everyone's an influencer and everybody's doing this left and right. So that was kind of my way of saying, here's a weird name. No one else will have it. It'll be uniquely mine. Boom. There it is.
I know you're not just a podcaster. You are a creator of various different things. If you could have told yourself one thing, though, to make it easier when you started podcasting, what would you told yourself? Easier. Yeah. What's one thing, if you could travel back in time and tell yourself one thing, sort of thing, Back to the Future, and you give yourself the book of podcasting, but they can only take one page from it. What's the one thing that you would have told yourself?
Well, here's what I would do. I would take that time machine back to 1984 and I would find young me and I would say, guess what you're doing when you're old? You're doing exactly what you want to do right now. And then that kid would scream and yell, stranger, and run away. Okay. Then I would get back into the time machine. I would fly to 2009. I would tell myself to not sweat the little stuff. I was so stressed about, it doesn't even seem little when you say it, but I need to make sure we pay the bills. I can't, my kids they got school. I got to keep food on the table. Like all these like life necessity, why we have to work sort of stuff. I was really concerned that, can I really do this? Can I knock this out of the park enough? I don't need to be, I don't need to be a millionaire. I just want to cover my bases, pay my bills, and then do a job that I have passion for and that I love. And I think I was too worried about that. And if I could go back and tell myself, I would say, this is very 2020 vision here, but I would say, don't sweat that stuff. Just go for it. Just make the best content you can. There's a reason people like your stuff. Make more of it. Make those fans happy. And that's all you got to do. You don't need to worry so much about where, your next paycheck's going to come from, because it'll just work itself out. And it did. It totally did. It absolutely worked itself out. And there, it's unusual and weird. I don't have some guy giving me a check every 2 weeks. I don't have some automatic bank transfer from some company I work for. I got to buy my own insurance. Like there's all these issues that definitely come with this. I would tell myself not to sweat that stuff. Just accept it for what it is. Implement what you have to, get legal with whatever you got to do, and then just go and make. I think that's what I would do. Because I spent an inordinate amount of time worrying about that crap, and I didn't.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet. Yeah. I have not been self-employed ever, so I don't have that mindset, so to speak. Not like I haven't. I've started companies, I've started charities, 501c3s, but I just don't have the desire to do that. I like my job. I'm a rocket scientist. I like doing that stuff. Do you have any nitpicks or gripes with the general podcasting industry that you think would make podcasting better if something would change?
That's a great question. Yeah, I do actually. It's changed over the years. I used to have a lot of complaining to do about comedians who got into podcasting and then felt like they invented the medium because they brought a big audience over with them. And so all of us who had to kind of build something from scratch, they just can't relate to that. Like it just doesn't make any sense to them. You would start at zero. So the Mark Marons of the world and the Joe Rogans of the world and these people, they're all fine. I've no problem with anything they make. It's all great, but I didn't love, in 2010 or 12, them going, well, now the podcasting's the thing. I was like, no, it's been a thing. Been doing it forever. Been doing it before a couple of you were doing anything. So that kind of drives me a little nuts. It's small, it's petty. It's what's changed more for me is my irritation with the business side of it and big companies trying to capture podcasting as if it's in their own garden. Spotify's guilty of this. Apple's been guilty of this. Although, if anything, Apple's been the most hands-off because they kind of have never quite known what to do with it. They just sort of had it and had the advantage of being named after their products and, they're all of that. So it's a little bit weird, but everybody in some way or another, and in particular now Spotify, they try to create these paid systems where you can only get the content there. And it annoys me. I understand the need to monetize, and I think they should. What annoys me is this idea that, well, you have to get it through us or you can't get it. That's the antithesis of podcasting and the very roots of the technology. It flies in the face of that. The technology was designed to be wholly distributable no matter who you were, where you were, how you got it. And I think that should stay as pure as possible through whatever the lifeline of this thing is for as long as possible. But the problem is the more money it attracts, the more these guys get these ideas of like, well, what if we captured 60% of the podcasting market by locking in a bunch of these shows as exclusives and then people have to pay to get to them? This paywalling of podcast content really bums me out. So I hope we see less of that moving forward.
You would have loved to have been at Podcast Movement in 2021, not this year, but last year, because Mark Cuban got up on the stage and said we were all wrong and, told us that we had to do it right by using his new thing. So kind of what you're talking about right there, but I witnessed it in person and I had hoped to get some advice from Mark, kind of inspiration, the way that big keynote speakers come in and do, but no, he just paid to get the stage to hawk his fireside chat thing or whatever it is.
Yeah. And all that stuff is, again, like big wigs and big money getting involved, isn't it? Really my problem, but it's this wanting to bend it toward themselves, to bend the entire thing toward themselves. To me, that just forgets its origins. It forgets its roots. And I realize that, I could be a guy talking about ham radio right now, or I could be a guy talking about the way old radio used to work, or early television, or closed, local cable. What do they call that? Not cable, but the
cable access.
Local access cable, that kind of stuff. Like people will troglodyte themselves and stand there and pound the sand and go, "This was better when they weren't involved." I get that, and I'm also averse to that. I like change. When it comes to technology, I'm very much a progressive. Let's progress, let's move, let's do all of that. It's just there's something just a little bit more wrong about saying, well, we need to take podcasting and bend it to our particular brand and will. I don't like that at all. And everybody thought Apple were going to be the worst offenders. They're not even close, not even remotely close. And they even have a little, hey, if we choose your show and put it as part of the Apple exclusive stuff, you could get extra whatever. I mean, they've made little attempts here and there, but it hasn't been nearly as egregious as Spotify, as Google at one point, although Google seems to not care about any of it anymore. But that's kind of a Google thing. They tend to just leave stuff. And Amazon, they've got their ideas. Facebook dropped their podcast directory. I mean, everybody tried to get in and get a piece of the pie. I just wish they weren't also focused on making sure. It's like this metaverse talk. It's the same thing. It's like the metaverse needs to evolve like the internet itself. Podcasting needs to evolve like the internet itself. It needs to be a free and open and available standard, not some locked away thing, or else we're just back to cable companies and back to one company controls everything. And there's already too much of that as it is. So yeah, that's probably longer than I meant to have that go, but I'm annoyed by that stuff.
Hey, in the metaverse, I'm going to have the best darn podcast studio on this 450-foot yacht in the middle of this gorgeous panoramic view in the Caribbean or the Mediterranean or something like that. So I'm all for the metaverse and podcasting.
Yeah, let's do it. Those two going. They just have to be open. That's it. Like whenever I hear Facebook/Meta act like they're going to be the gatekeepers to all things metaverse, I just laugh. It's not going to happen that way. I'm sorry, it just isn't any more than AOL did or anyone else did when the internet was the version of the thing we're looking down the barrel of. Like it doesn't work. It may work in a splash or a moment or a quick fix, or you'll make a bunch of money before it changes, but people don't want that. They don't want it. Like there's an app on VR devices, including the Meta Quest, but also all the PC stuff and everything, called VR Chat. Stupid name, even developed by two guys. Now they got a bigger team, but it's basically just two guys, and it's just Wild West in there. It's insane. And people say, "Well, that can't be the future of VR and Meta." And I'm like, "No, it can, and probably likely will be, because that's the pattern this stuff goes. The internet was that. It was a Wild West. It was weird. It was weird message boards and Usenets and all this crazy crap. And, then the web came along, and then everybody's like got their own websites, and it's all just crazy town. And then people tried to control that, bring it in, make it in their own little garden. I don't think anybody trying to do that, it's a fool's errand. And there may be some short-term money in it, but it's not the long-term. And that's why I want podcasting to maintain its independence as a format and not get roped into some bull crap. I just don't want it. I always try to evolve with the stuff, but that one would really bum me out if, one company controlled the fate of all podcasting. Freaking forget it.
Well, I don't want to bum you out. Let's end on something positive. So you look back on your career of podcast, your lifelong successful career of podcasting, and it doesn't have to be one or the most or anything. But what is a fond or favorite moment that you've had over the course of the 20 some years that you've been podcasting?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. It's hard for me to pick one. That stage gig at Blizzcon was a big deal. Probably. Okay, I know what it is. This is going to seem weird. Maybe not. There's been a bunch of great interviews, a bunch of great moments, very funny moments, like stuff I, still have clips of, and I still look back on fondly and all of that. But I think the big one for me in particular was Nerdtacular 2015. Probably the best event we ever threw. We rented out an entire ski resort up here in the canyons above Salt Lake City. And we had this huge ballroom and, all this space and everything. It's up in the mountains in the summer, so the beach is beautiful up there, cooler than the rest of the valley, all that. So it's already just really nice setting. And there was a moment when I was on stage toward the end of it where I looked out on that crowd and I saw so many faces that I only know because of this effort, because of this, of the shows of me doing this work. It's the only way I know these people. And I realized how many of them I consider to be close personal friends, people who I care about very deeply, that I worry about, that I, they have babies and I get excited and we send them gifts, like just this like new family. And then as I see this, I'm standing there with my wife, Kim, next to me, and my three kids, my two daughters and my son, standing all up there together, and realized I had that going on. And there was something about that moment that just made me go, everything about this was worth every second of it. And it's funny that it all really just came down to relationships and people and family and, some very primordial human stuff. But that was the effect of it. And that's when I knew it was all worth it in this weird way. And, I've always told people that I had an advantage raising my kids. They're all, my youngest is now 22, but when I was in the thick of all this, they were 10 and 6 and 4 and, they were little kids. And this all had a way of them thinking I was a little cooler than I am. You know what I mean? Like I'm kind of a pud like everybody else, but they just saw this person who was getting getting all this fan mail or getting things sent in the mail or showing up to an event like this and everybody wanting to shake your hand and get your signature and this sort of stuff. I think they all helped me raise my kids. and it sounds weird to say that, but they just had very little to complain about. They couldn't go to school and go, "My dad's so lame." They couldn't do that because it just wouldn't have been true. And I'm not even saying it's me doing it. It's what surrounded me. So, like, I'm really grateful for that community being around during that time, because it just, I don't know, it made for so much fun at home. And kind of across the board, the takeaway for me that day, that moment on that stage, and it literally was like just a moment, was just like, this was all worth it, and all of these people matter to me. And it was like this moment of, I wouldn't change a thing, even though there was probably a thing I would change. It didn't matter in that moment. I just like, this is perfect. This is right where I want to be. That's probably it. It sounds a little high-minded and out there, but I think that was probably my biggest thing. It's perfect.
What you just did is you wrote the ending to the hit streaming movie on Apple TV Plus, The Morning Stream, and yourself played by, I don't know, Seth MacFarlane up there on stage with everybody. You just wrote it, and it's going to be such a hit, Scott. It's going to be a hit.
Can't wait. Seth MacFarlane, good guys. He's going to have to gray his hair up a little, or let it go. I know it's kind of gray now. He just colors it. So Seth, start looking a little bit older, and yeah, you can play me. And if he's not around, some other handsome, good-looking dude. I'm starting to look like old Russell Crowe instead of young Russell Crowe. So maybe that's the guy. Maybe hire him.
I just saw Thor: Love and Thunder over the weekend, so Zeus, I completely get what you're saying. Completely get. And then I saw Brendan Fraser, out in the stands with his new movie. I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah,
I know, right? It feels like 1,000 years ago that he was Encino Man, and look at him now. And I don't know, time is weird, but yeah, it's. I would rather be doing this with my time than just about anything else.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Scott, for coming on and expounding your knowledge and experience to the Better Podcasting audience. Where can people find you?
Well, the easiest place is frogpants.com, which, again, is a really old domain now. You can go there and you can find everything. There's links to all the shows, all the artwork I do, which we didn't really even get into, but all the comics and illustration work I do, that's all there. It's a weird kind of two-ply company where there's a lot of art and a lot of podcasts, and you'll probably enjoy a mix of them. So whatever you're into right now, you'll find something there. That's frogpants.com. And if they're trying to find me publicly, I talk to everybody on Twitter. So you can find me over at twitter.com/Scott Johnson.
And you also have that great Discord community too. Is the link for that on your website?
It is. If you go to frogpants.com/Discord directly, it'll take you straight there. But it's also all over the place on the contact page and all the sub pages and everything. So it's everywhere you look over there, and it's a good community. We got a lot of great people in there, kind of an extension of the group. It's funny, when I started doing this stuff, it was all forums, and then things went very social media, and now Discord's making out all kind of forums again. It's weird. Yeah. It's weird seeing all of that happen. And I know, there's a bunch of kids today, early 20s kids, who are like, Discord's all there ever was. I'm like, no. Things have changed a lot, children.
They have. All right, Scott, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And thank you for spending your time with Scott and me. If you like content like this, please subscribe to the Better Podcasting YouTube channel and like the video. Or if you are listening to the audio version of this, please give Better Podcasting Chats with SP a follow on your podcatcher app. Stephen and I would greatly appreciate it. Now, in 2 weeks, which means I'm taking next week off, I have a little fall vacation that I take every year. So in 2 weeks, I have some time scheduled with Jamie Taylor from the United Kingdom. Now, Jamie has been podcasting since 2017 and is currently the host of 3 podcasts, the .NET Core podcast, the Waffling Tailors, and Tabs and Spaces. Mostly it's about coding and development. Jamie wants to talk about getting started podcasting, planning out episodes, avoiding the dreaded gear acquisition syndrome, the dangers of stretching yourself too thin, and the art of trying to be a good facilitator. So join us on Tuesday, September 27th, 2022 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be streamed on the Better Podcasting YouTube channel. In the meantime, you can join our podcasting conversation on our Discord server, betterpodcasting.com/Discord. You can find both Stephen and myself there every day. And stay tuned for future announcements on the return of Better Podcasting. See you next time.